Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to our pop-up Just My 3 Cents podcast, where we make it make sense as we do these difficult conversations on race, sex, and culture. I got a special guest in the background with me. I'm gonna go ahead and get this brother on so we can rock it out. We pop-up shows. We're gonna make them quick. We're not gonna be here long. Talking about this Deion thing. What's up, Michael? How you doing, King?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, man, doing well, man. Glad to for you to make some time for me, man. We just are informal with these pop-up shows. We just get right to the issue, if you will. And so I just kind of highlighted that, hey, we know, everybody knows Deion Sanders is leaving Jackson State, going to, just got the job for University of Colorado Buffaloes. They were very good back in my day. So it's
right.
Yeah, it's a long time since they've been good. I remember, I think it was Darius Hagan and Cordell Stewart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They won a championship by accident with a fifth down. So I remember when they was really good. You know what I'm saying? So now they bottom feeders out there in the Pac-12, I think it is, and Deion's going to take over that job, and obviously a lot of people are upset. But even in doing these dialogues, as I mentioned to you, you asked me, you say, hey, Montoya, are you doing today? Am I going to jump on it? And so what I told you was, I don't jump on these hot button items unless we have something different.
Right.
Unless we have something different that's not being said in the national media. And so I jumped on this because I do think I have something to offer. I'm very interested in your thoughts because you didn't held me down on the Middle Dialogue Talk Show. We done did thoughtful rants together, so they always go next level. So I am interested in your input, assuming it won't be what's already out there to a degree, because I think it's been talked about and still being talked about to the nth degree. But again, I hope we offer something that's a little different. And, I'm even rocking my little JSU shirt. You know what I mean?
See
Because let me highlight this too. I know I'm running off at the mouth, but Prime Time and Jerry Rice was my favorite players of all time. So I've been following them closely for a long time. I'll tell you how that comes into play. But just real quick, any thoughts? Brother did his thing 3 years, went to see, now going to Colorado. But just an initial thought from you, and then I'm gonna kind of get into what I think is a deeper thought and things that are not being said. But anything you got before I even go there?
Well, man, I spent the weekend really absorbing a lot of the talk about it because I heard the rumors. I even have a cousin that's always been like, I told y'all he's going. Everything is not what people seem. And so I kind of disregarded it until when it blew up. It wasn't so much, and you know me. I saw the deal, saw what it looked like, and I went, makes sense to me. Like, this is what's supposed to happen. But looking at social media and the vitriol that I saw my people have about it and go back and forth with it, it made me really step back. Like, I wanted to say something, then I was like, no. Then I was like, just read, watch. And what I watched was something that was hurtful to me on a lot of different levels. And it was that going back and forth. And the thing that stuck out to me was like, what is everybody going to do next? Is anybody even thinking about what's happening next? And the only thing I heard people say was, well, Jackson State gonna be all right. That was it. And I went, okay. So all this vitriol just to say everybody gonna be all right? Nah, that's like your woman saying, I'm fine, Yeah, I'm fine.
So. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a little different than that, man.
Yeah.
And here's the significance of you actually deciding to reach out to me and say, I want to do this. A couple of years back, you may recall this, you and I did a show of what if all the black athletes, 5A athletes, went to HBCUs. I definitely recommend that people hear that show. I'm assuming a lot of what we say today will fall in line with that dialogue. But we did a full dialogue on what that would look like. And one thing that I feel like when I'm talking to you that we always do very well is bring context and perspective. That's what I'm always trying to bring anyway with the Mental Dialogue Talk Show. But I just think you are masterful at bigger context that sometimes people miss. So I assume where I go will make sense with you. And so before I start, though, I want to just kind of at least get the nuts and bolts of what's already been said out there. And I felt like Joy Taylor on her
Right.
show, I think it's called, I'm about to play a cut. I forgot the exact
Right.
name, something speaks or whatever. I'm about to play a cut real quick. And I think this encapsulate, at least if you're on Deion side of it. I'm going to play another cut later by Bonnie Jones that
Right.
gives another perspective. Because as I always say, the answer is always in the middle. But I don't want to have dialogue about what's right or wrong ultimately. But I do
Right.
want to give that context and then go somewhere much deeper if possible. So bear with me as I share the screen, everybody, and play this cut. Hold on 1 second. All right, my share screen ain't where it normally is. What I'm doing wrong here? Present. Oh, wow. I ain't done this in a while. It's usually right
And
here.
look, I'm always like that on stuff like that. So it's all good.
It's normally right here. I don't know if I done did something. They didn't change the way it looks. I might not be able to. Okay, let me see. Let me try this. Here
You
we
gotta
go.
be able to share now. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it. It was in a it's in a different spot. All right, y'all. I'm finna share screen. This is just the words. Some of y'all, more of y'all probably already seen it, but I just want to share it for those who hadn't seen it, because again, this is if you're on Deion's side. What I think she said makes a lot of sense, and I'll get your thoughts on it as well, Michael. All right, so let me share this screen. All right, here we go. Make it big and play it.
Goes to Jackson State or is a Jackson State alum who's upset. Similar to when Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma. I don't think it's reasonable to be mad at Lincoln Riley, but I get Oklahoma fans not liking Lincoln Riley, and so on and so forth. We see this with jobs, with college jobs and professional jobs all the time. Because you're a fan and you care, that's understandable. If you aren't a Jackson State alum, however, I'm really confused, because Deion went there, elevated the program, brought attention to the program, brought in students, got college game days there, dedicated himself to building this program, and had actual quantifiable success. Deion Sanders was in the hospital having toes amputated and was out on the sideline, out in recovery on the sideline at games. You telling me this man wasn't dedicated to the school? He was using the school? He was giving money back to the school? I don't understand why it is a bad thing to move on to another place. Because what's happened now through all this conversation is Deion was leaving this job, a great job. This was a job that someone could come to and they'll put their own stamp on it. Clearly, you can have success there because he's shown that you can. Now it's not a good job, because if you take that job, you got to stay there forever or you're a sellout. So if you're not Deion Sanders, how do you have the reputation to go there as an aspirational person to ever want to move on to somewhere else? So what was a good job is now not a good job.
Pretty perfect summary.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Now let me see how to stop sharing the screen. Stop. There we go. So I'll let you jump in on those thoughts from Joy Taylor. Say, hey, what was a good job is now not a good job, and specifically due to the reaction is what I hear her saying. But let me hear your thoughts on that. Again, we're gonna move past the right or wrong, but I want to go ahead and address this first.
Again, I've absorbed so much over the weekend because I'm typically quick to my opinions and that sort of thing, like on it. Like I saw, and again, from my position, I saw nothing wrong. Not a HBCU grad, you know how that goes. So that exempts me from something of it. But I'm like, being part of the Black community, and also what doesn't exempt me for that is part of my quest in my professional capacity is I'm working with HBCUs to help their endowments grow larger, so that the school can have more resources, which is why this hurt me so bad. Like, and it wasn't, again, like you said, it wasn't the Deion leaving, but it was the response and the conversations that came out of it were so angry that I'm like, Joy, I saw only after absorbing, I'm talking about days of it. Right. Like I talked to my wife about it, and she was like, why are you bothered? I was like, you know, this stuff bothers me like this. And she's like, why are you bothered? You know, this doesn't have anything to do with you. I'm like, it has everything to do with me because, you know, I'm in that absorptive. I go from being almost a robot to an empath. But when it comes to Black experience things, and especially when I see this as being financial on individual, but also social and community levels, that's what got me. I said, how much are we thinking about what just happened? how much are the other things that were overshadowed? I saw people talking about, oh, well, the kids didn't get their good kudos for, this thing overshadowed their championship, their undefeated, year. That was one thing. I was like, they also killed off this brother's accolades. Like, there is nobody, except for in an argument to the scenario, talking about what was shown. And I saw a lot of people say, oh, well, Deion left a blueprint. Then other people were like, no, Deion didn't leave a blueprint. I don't think it's as cut and dry as a blueprint, but I think the pieces and resources are such, they're like on the table right now. And if we stop arguing, it really go back to saying, what? Like literally, like I said, like what just happened? There is something so beautiful, so profound here, but I think it's going to get left. And that one thing is, we got to imagine for a while, like you said, it was prescient that we had that show a few years ago. We got to imagine for a while that the things that we had for seeing HBCUs that we see, like again, I'm a child of my parents went to Alcorn, Jackson State rivals, so the Soul Bowl, as it used to be called, that was religion. That was religion. So in a sense, a part of the culture that was been religious for us for growing up was now on a national stage. And a lot of people say, well, it was always that way. I've always been me, but I've grown up, so the things and experiences that I am now are not what I was when I was 17 or even 7. Exactly. The same thing happened. So what we saw was a quick adaptation or evolutionary event. My thing is like, how do we make this the norm instead of it was a pump and dump and people say, oh, well, it's a lot of people, it's going to go back to the same or it's just fine. So that's kind of my take on it.
So, yeah. So here's the higher dialogue, in my opinion. I'm going to eventually play the Bo Money cut, which is another perspective. I don't want us to be just in is he right or is he wrong, because there's so much more here. So you touched on a lot of things that delves me into what I consider the bigger picture. A good friend of mine, Shelly Winters, who's been on the show before, he highlighted on his page just real quick and on his post on his Facebook page, and it got a lot of likes. But I'm gonna paraphrase him very badly. But he just simply made a post about how quickly a lot of people turned on Deion. Like how quickly that happened, and for most of our entire lives, outside of you being someone who didn't like a primetime showboating or that style, outside of that, he's been a beloved athlete literally since he's hit the scene at Florida State. You know what I mean? And winning, I think the Thorpe Award is what the cornerback award is called, if I remember correctly. Yep. And so, finding out he was a multiplayer and all this kind of stuff, and we watched him break barriers, get the highest contract as a cornerback. It's the reason why all the cornerbacks
he restructured how that happened, which again, to me, going into that, here's a guy who has sought higher levels in his career for money, however you want to see it. That's been his MO as long as we've known it, but it's different when it's at home.
And so me personally knowing his story, because him and Jerry Rice were my favorite athletes. And for those who know, I dig into stats, read books and stories about my favorite athletes or whatever. So I literally had an argument a week and a half ago in the barbershop telling some guy, Deion, but not just because I'm saying I know him and I read his story. I thought like he courted. The first year he courted going to some interviews.
Right.
And he didn't hide it. So, but that in itself wasn't why I said it. It's because his MO has been exactly what it's been or whatever. And it sometimes, even in the NFL, it almost seemed like he was a gun for hire. But we come to find out over the years, as we came to know the man, it was literally saying, if I do this on this court, my value should be more, but not just me specifically. This position does this. And so believe it or not, in helping himself, he's proven he had the whole position in mind of being so he ended up proving that, even though we couldn't notice it as it was happening. I'm a 49er fan, so I was damn sure happy the year we got him. And like a Jackson State fan, was mad as hell when he went to
exactly.
Beat our ass the next couple of years. The man that gave us our 5th championship. Right. So like Joy Taylor said, if it's happening to your team, because she kind of mentioned, if you're from JSU, I get it. Be mad. She said, she said, ultimately, I don't get that either, but she understands that that's the norm for college athletes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Oklahoma don't like Lincoln Riley now, just to highlight that. So anyway, let me go ahead and jump in, not take too long to get to the bigger point. So when Shelly said, hey, it's sad how quickly we turn. And so as I sat back and watched this and didn't want to just again get into the same conversations that everybody's having about whether he's right or wrong, the work that we do at Mental Dialogue is constantly to address what happened. I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. It's very expected that the vitriol is exactly what it was for me. I don't know about
it wasn't for me. It hit me different.
But for me, it's absolutely expected. None of this surprised me. It's not that I'm a see all be all type thing. It's just that I'm constantly in the space of the psychological trauma throughout our culture for a lot of people. Now, everybody has it, but there is a collective level of trauma that we experience in our community. So no, I wasn't surprised.
Wow.
What I will say though, in again, not being surprised, here's the sad thing about it. And maybe this part did surprise me. Just from the standpoint of to see how bad the collective hurt is. Yeah. How bad the collective hurt is. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about like you did, it was, business as usual. You understood the decision. You got so there's plenty of people that were like, oh, that was fine. So if you're in that space, that's not who I'm speaking to in that sense.
Right.
However, and again, it's not about who's right or wrong, but it's just talking about the fact that there's this idea. And I love how you said that at 7 and at 17, I was always that, but I've grown.
I've grown.
So there's an aspect that I feel like we need to talk about, which is graduating to what 2022 looks like, what 2032 looks like for anyone in our community that's aspirational. The Deion Sanders is just an obvious situation.
I see where you're going. I see it.
It's just an obvious situation to give us a chance to talk about it. Because even in our personal talks, like, I'm pretty sure anybody that's watching this was surprised. Hey, it was kind of so by happenstance, but you literally are doing the work to increase HBCUs and endowments. So it's just the universe works very well because I didn't you didn't ask me that question because I remembered that. But we've been talking about it recently. Like that's a thing that you're seriously working on, right?
Yep.
So this becomes near and dear to you. But again, as I highlight that particular, ultimately the bigger picture is we've had this dialogue for years. We did a show, Just My 3 Cents, months ago, talking about what is the expectation for those in our community who get wealthy. We first use the athletes and the musicians because they're the easy example of what are their expectations. And we highlighted from the I Am Athlete podcast when they had a brother having that very discussion, and the brother was saying, I think it was the former running back for the Atlanta Falcons. I wish I could say his name, but I don't want to say his name incorrectly. But a long time fullback, whatever, that's done very well for himself. But he said on that show, and I'm about to make it full circle to the conversation. He said on that show, whenever we get our money, we are expected in our community for the money to trickle up.
That's Fred Taylor. Yep. Fred Taylor, I think.
Yep. And fortunately, for other communities and cultures, they know the money is supposed to trickle down.
Right.
The reason that money conversation applies is because from a psychological standpoint, Deion moving from Jackson State to Colorado, obviously making a lot more money, right?
Right.
But when you're still in this mind space of money trickling up, let me make the analogy make sense here.
Yeah.
It speaks to this informal obligation that stays with us, that we live with. And a lot of times as you elevate, you've been through this personally. You and I've had conversations where I've said, Michael, the higher you go, it's going to be the benefit for our culture, whether you end up being an example in history or you get enough to help the people you specifically help.
Right.
Don't be obligated to those you don't know. I just have that dialogue with you because when you're obligated to think that way, because it comes to you naturally. And I have felt this way most of my life as well.
Right.
So it's not that I'm not understanding it. It's because I understand it that I want to have the dialogue to get into the vitriol is coming from an unrealistic and unfair expectation. But again, here's the other part. I'll let you jump in. Not only is it unfair and unrealistic, it's not practical to our elevation as a people. And because we don't know that part, we don't see it as, for example, it's the first time in history, not that a coach has elevated from a HBCU to a D1 college football program.
Absolutely. And that's not to be taken lightly.
Accolade, but we'll miss this accolade due to this unrealistic trauma of expectation of what should happen when we're serving our own, or we have this idea of how we should serve our own. Let me let you jump in. I got more to say. I want to let you jump in right there.
No, you hit some beautiful points because, again, that was even when my fund was even smaller than it is now. My footprint is not big now, but it was much smaller. And again, the same analogy of getting older. My footprint at 7 is not the same as 17, not the same as now. I remember, seeing, and I would always look for athletes because they were such, like you said, so out there. How do they go from boom to bust? How do they do these? How do they go through these cycles? It was because the weight on them from the community around them. When I started really studying, I'm seeing one, first round draft pick to get $60-100 million, but he's actually feeding an entire community. Even, you say Michael Vick. Vick was one of my favorite, still is one of my favorite athletes, favorite personalities, but to see his rise and fall, but to see how many people he was carrying along with him really only resonates with this Deion thing to me, to where I saw, again, I take all of my opinions now from the arguments I saw, which was for the people said that one, he lied because he came in as, you talk about unrealistic expectations. They were like, he said he was God sent as a savior to HBCUs. My rational mind thought, again, being completely displaced from this, going, who would believe that anyway? You know what I mean? It's like,
absolutely.
That's just like somebody come to me and say, hey, bro, I got this $100. If you give it to me, I can put it in this thing and you get $1,000 out every week.
Well, let me, I'm not, as crazy as that sounds, let me just add this and let you finish.
Yeah.
But let's add the context of the transactional industry of coaching at all levels.
Yes.
So to hold someone to that in an industry in which transaction, if you're good, you go higher.
Well,
if you could do good and seem to not do good and be gone.
Exactly.
So just the idea of believing it in that industry,
right,
is a whole nother level. But go ahead, brother. I just want to highlight how even crazier it is to hold to those words in an industry that's as transactional as coaching.
But you don't know what you don't know, because that's the first time we're hearing that. That's the first time that's ever been a thing that we ever heard. So if I've heard him say he's the savior, and that was early on, and we still have clips and we've replayed that, and the actions that he's taken at 27 and 5 seem to kind of go towards a savior, to the $50 million in revenue that has been brought in, to the, the Under Armour, the NIL bringing, even The Rock and, whatever he was doing, they will see it. All the things that have been brought seem to be physically turning the tide against this thing that we're not talking about, this thing that is undone, which, if that's what everybody talked to me about, or I saw, was saying that he left a job undone. And I went, well, what was his real job? They will point back to a savior, a God-sent savior. But I said, no, what was his real contractual job? What was his real, like you said, obligation within the compounds of being a coach? And then, but everybody would go, hey, well, coach is bigger than just a job. It's more. And so it highlights a lot of these things, but it also uncovered to me a lot of misunderstandings or not understandings about, one, universities, not just HBCUs, but the universities, the religion that is football, right? The business, the marketing, the entirety of the ecosystem that is football, what we see, what we expect, and these misalignments are part of the problem that when something that naturally progresses, like a coach doing a fantastic job. I mean, again, people talked about it was unfair how Jackson State had no competition. That was the other key to me too. I was going, either the playing field has to level up, like I've seen with first when Tesla came out with the EV, and now everybody has an EV. Some, which I would extend, are superior to Tesla's vehicle. That hasn't happened in 3 years in HBCUs. At least if we're just talking about records, and we're just talking about the programs.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet. So I understand now with him leaving, it seems like it's a vacuum, but unlike at Oklahoma, like Joy talked about, even if it was at Alabama is going to be a different place after Saban leaves. He's going to leave one way or the other, probably graveyard, you know. He's going to leave one way because they can raise the assets to keep him there, preserve him as long as he's working, as long as what he's doing is working, right? But the thing that's undone for us is the fact that the machine, or the whatever you want to call it, the system behind everything there is so filled with inequities, so filled with, you know, even our own understandings and takes on stuff that is inhibiting what should be a natural progression, a natural thought frame, to where either some people are talking about the past, oh, it always was good, we were always this, or they're talking about it's going to be all right, we're going to be fine. But nobody's actually thinking, well, do we really have a succession plan? How do we build upon this? What if there is not a blueprint? It doesn't matter if he left one or not. Can we make one? Can we take what we have?
Good question. Well, it's a place I really want to go higher than this, but I want to jump in Bo Money Jones.
Yeah, let's hit it.
Because again, I wanted to make sure I'm always trying to be fair, right? So I had her take, but Money gave me some things to think about because I hadn't seen his take till this morning. I actually saw it on Dr. Boyd's IG. And so I'm playing it from there or whatever. So let me do another share screen. So I got it right this time. And we'll hear what he had to say and get a quick dialogue on that. Because I still want to go even higher than we're going right now, to be honest with you.
Let's get it.
We want to be fair to both sides of this. All right, let's see here. I think I got it right here. Yep. Actually, I might have it in my. Let me see if I got it over in another spot. All right, here we go. Share. All right, you can see that screen?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, here we go. Uh-oh, get the volume.
Just do all the time, which is you have to sell people 4-year, 10-year plans when your plan is always 1 year at a time. That's the only way that you could really pull that off. And so he came in and he sold a long-term vision for what was going on at Jackson State, but his goals and ambitions were always to be a Power 5 head coach. My take has always been he went to Jackson State primarily because he wanted to be a head coach, but didn't want to ever be anybody's assistant coach. So we had to find somebody that would give him a job and make him a head coach, and so he could have that on his resume, and then he could take that to try to get the job that he actually wanted. Jackson State was the place that could do it, and he did a lot of good work while he was at Jackson State. But all the bigger, grandiose notions of what he was doing for somebody else, no, it was what it always is. He did it for Deion, and that's fine if you don't tell us that you're trying to do this for somebody else.
But can he do both? Can't he go to a program and be there for 3 years, only have 5 losses like he did, and bring the attention? Maybe the next person won't be, prime time. They won't be as charismatic as he is, but he still did bring attention to it. And what I've seen from the athletic director and other people is they were grateful for him, and they talked about him going on, and something he signaled because of the financial disparities here.
No, he's very good, but I think the magnitude of the financial disparity is so much greater than anybody realizes. I think the magnitude of the financial disparity between HBCUs and other FCS schools, the smaller division in Division I, is bigger than people realize it is. So there's room to criticize him for the way that he has left and for the fact that his initial rhetoric is not in line with his ultimate.
Then what would you have him do? What would you have the man do?
Oh, well, I wouldn't have come in the first place and said that God sent me here to fix HBCUs, and God decided that in the middle of it you were supposed to leave. Right? I mean, like, the thing I've said is maybe God wants 10% of $5 million and not 10% of 375. If God can do math, I can understand why it is. He sold a dream and then walked out on the dream. People have the right to be critical of that. I also would have taken the job that he took at Colorado, right? It's not a judgment of the fact that he took the job, but this is not in line with what he told us for all these years. But
solid.
Yeah, definitely some good things to think about. You had already touched on the point that he told us, I was a guy.
Right.
You've already spoke to, if you will, the idea of, just even why would you believe that to a degree, right?
Yeah.
And
That was my
if you heard Bobani say in the very beginning, that is for the most part, which makes sense. When you come into a job, you have to say, I'm going to be there. You tell those students you're going to be there, because the reality is, even if you're building a program and you're starting to have success, let's say you're not even, let's make it all D1, right? Let's say, you and I go coach at the University of Missouri and we get Missouri on the level of Georgia,
Yes.
right? Then Texas is going to come calling. But the thing is, you and I and the coaching staff, we had planned to stay at Missouri
for X amount of years,
And when we're telling the kids we're going to be here, we mean that. But we don't know Texas finna come calling.
Exactly.
When Texas started come calling with that 15 mil a year versus this 4 mil a year, I gotta look at it. Again,
Exactly.
That's just the nuts and bolts of it all, right? But again, I thought Bamoni made some fair points. I wanted to bring it to the table and and kind of put them there. But I want to go much higher with this thing. I want to turn this whole conversation upside down.
Because I see so many areas too. It's so many things.
But I want to turn the whole conversation all the way upside down. So when you said, what's the succession plan? What does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm always pushing for when it comes to this concept of serving our community, we already talked about that natural obligation and how, we've already kind of both agreed it's not helpful because every other culture understands that the money's supposed to pass down. Mm-hmm. That's something that we should learn. Master, like you're doing, you're mastering this money game. Slowly. And you're going to pass it down to make sure your next generation builds off of it. If obviously you're going to take care of your parents. That's a natural thing.
Right.
But if you spread that too thin, then it's not as helpful for your lineage, right? So that's what other countries are free to do. Mm-hmm. Let's flip this on his ups all the way on his head. So what happens is, as a culture, James Baldwin talked about here years ago the double consciousness. W.E. Du Bois talked about the double consciousness of race. But James Baldwin talked about how, just paraphrasing real bad, the idea of how it's hard not to be angry, right? As a black man in America with the things we experience. And of course, he's saying it at those times when things were very different, right? So what happens is we can hold on to those quotes and those passages, often, in my opinion, without putting in context what advancements have happened since that time. And James Baldwin talked about, even personally, let me highlight this real quick, that he always loved America, which reserved him the right to be able to criticize her. Right? He always talked about that. But what happens is when we take a quote that applies to a degree, like obviously after a police shooting that goes viral and gets on national news, which at Mental Dialogue, we tell y'all don't watch those things. But naturally, that quote can come right into your mind and the trauma makes you say nothing's changed. So what happens is when we're upset, for example, for those who are upset, again, I'm not saying all of us, like to be real clear, because people think you're, generalizing and say, that's not all of us. I don't want to waste time on who it is and who it isn't. I'm just generalizing here. But for those who are upset, what happens is when we're upset, we resort back to saying, look how things were, how they were, or like you kind of mentioned, this is how it's always been. So you hold to a spot and never recognize, one, if holding to that spot helps you currently, and two, you miss the progress that's been made. So the double consciousness still exists for us due to the history, but it ain't that we're always angry, whether we want to be honest about that or not.
Right.
The double consciousness now is more of, is this our country?
Oof. Yeah, you hit on it.
Think about it. Baldwin was saying the double consciousness, you could walk around angry all the time. We love the quote. However, this man is saying that double consciousness could have you angry all the time while loving the country. Like, you don't know, if you don't know Baldwin's story, you don't know that part, right? So now when we get angry, we're angry and saying they, and he not keeping his word to our community, because we have this concept of this obligation to building up what we have. Here's where I'm going to flip it and let you jump in. Here's the flip side. we're in a global world. I keep talking about this constantly on the talk show, the $1 Million Talk Show. We're in a global world where even the United States, when it could isolate itself and get away with being as racist as it was in the past, it was a time we could get away with it because we were pure isolationists. The world wasn't connected. Everybody couldn't get here easy. But in a global world, the United States, believe it or not, does not worry about race in the way that we think.
Yes.
But because of our experience, we still experience things that are similar to the past, and we jump to that space in consciousness. So there are some of us who are saying, hey, we'll say build up our own. I encourage building up our own, but I encourage doing it the most practical way.
Yes.
So what happens is when you take the history, and for example, when the baseball did not want blacks in it and there was a Negro league, like, of course, we love to highlight that history. That I think his name was Big Babe Bob Foster or whoever was Rube Foster or whatever that created the Negro League. So when we go back and learn that history, it is absolutely something to be proud of, right? It's absolutely something to be proud of. But we have this idea of, at one point, because we had to, there was this separation. I'm just using this as an example, even of these leagues. Eventually, Jackie Robinson embraced the barrier. And at the end of the day, we laugh at whatever records they had prior to any brothers being in it, right?
Right.
So here's our double consciousness. Our double consciousness is we'll still say it's their league. We'll still say that about every sport. It's them. Like it's the sister Deasia Robinson comes on my show as a Queen of Intellect member. She always hates when people say that the athletes are slaves. We're talking about $1 million people calling them slaves. And she goes, well, what about the white players? Are they slaves?
Right.
And the reason I'm going here, watch where I'm going. I'm gonna let you jump in.
It's beautiful.
The reason I'm going here is because even when they try to be racist as fuck, let's keep it a buck. They realize this ain't the smartest way or the most financial savvy way to play this game, not having the best athletes that could. So at that point, even though there's obviously was a lot of reluctancy, eventually the race barrier was broken in these sports. Yeah. And then not only was it broken, but widespread. Let's just get the best athletes. At that point, what this tells you is, and history has proven this throughout history, inclusion is your best elevation.
Bingo.
Inclusion is your best elevation. And in 2022, in a global world, the idea of having your own separate, I can show you countless situations in history where groups and cultures isolated via geography or choice got behind the rest of the world. This is historically happened for all groups. Jump in, King. Go ahead and jump in.
So you hit, like, I saw where you were going, then you jumped above that area. So I was like, thank you. But to bring it into the context of, like you said, the double mind and how you see yourself, because even myself, I promise you, I will have said, especially in the last 5 years, oh man, this ain't my country, like this. But then when I think about it, when I think about my roots, when I think about my people, I think about the progression. I was like, well, Harold, what could possibly be my country if not here? And it's for alignment of, like you said, inclusion and being able to be included. That's the stuff, like people say, oh, well, integration didn't work, civil rights didn't work. But I'm like, we're on, and we joke, we're on Beyonce's internet, we on whoever's internet we talk about. But it's like the idea of ownership rests so heavily as being part of I would just say, the true meaning of what being American, like truly being American is. But a lot of us haven't seen it, don't understand what the ownership is, like what you're talking about, and how you have to, in a business environment, your market starts small. Almost all markets start small, and they get wider and wider and wider. And you see the same thing in terms of organisms in science. You see the same type of growth, but that growth is exponential. It's only let happen that way when, like you said, you include. But we like to hold on to, and I have to say, not to everybody's, but in this context, you hear a lot of people, even entrepreneurs, say we need to make our own, but we're not thinking of that own being of a scale that is so great.
And let me jump in right here.
Yeah, go for it.
Jump in here. So, and we also mistakenly say it thinking that other groups thought that way.
Yes.
That's where I want to flip this on his head.
Yeah.
So to a degree, because of that double consciousness, you know, and because we're in America, we say PWIs, predominantly white institutions.
Right.
We use the term because we're in America, because the construct is a very real thing. It is a construct. I'm trying to weave through it as we talk about this. But what happens is we actually mistakenly feel like, oh man, they pull one of ours. Whereas the rest of the world is playing this way. Where can we go the highest?
Yes.
And you go the highest by putting it all in a barrel and being the best at it. So to think, let's bring it in today's context, to think Deion, who is aspirational as he is, wouldn't want to eventually test his abilities against the highest game. Here it is. But when you think double consciousness, you think of the highest game as if it's a they.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
The highest game is where everybody's at.
Case in point, we're just talking about the SEC. I'm a big SEC fan, of course, too. The vitriol that happened, but it kind of rose and fell about adding Texas and Oklahoma to, because it was like I looked at it and say, well, why would they want to be here? But when you start looking at the revenue sharing, for one, when you start looking at the channels, the markets that are covered, and I say, well, I understand once I looked at the numbers, I see what Texas gets, I see what Oklahoma gets. What does the SEC get? When I saw those numbers, I say this is a win-win. That's the blueprint. That's the blueprint.
Love your example. Yeah, I love your example.
That's it.
I'm a traditionalist, love old school basketball. I hate the super conferences. I'm talking about personally.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate this stuff.
Yeah.
I hate it. But the Texas Oklahoma example is perfect.
It blew my mind.
The biggest elevation was clearly for them to be like, sorry, Big 8 or whatever they were.
Yeah.
Whatever they became as these things, a lot of these things. It was clearly, and so if you can understand exactly what I'm saying, that's the game we're in the global world. So this concept of that example you just gave is perfect. So the concept that we would keep our same leagues because we always had them in college football, for example, is the way nobody else thinks about their race and their culture when doing business, or even on the level of watching the transcendent situation with the HBCUs. The HBCUs, I've done plenty of shows encouraging and still encourage that our students go there. And the better the sports are, the more students you get. It's all a hand-in-hand,
like religion,
symbiotic dance. So so even in being okay with Deion leaving, I do want to clarify, and even with me making this dialogue, I'm not saying there's not a need. You fill your lane, master your niche. It's not always easy. And Bo Money pointed to something that nobody about, that the difference between the other FS1, how you say it, the
FCS, but
FBS level, and it's like that ain't even being talked about. So when Deion leaves, is there a huge possibility there's going to be a vacuum unfilled? You're damn right. When you find out, like Bo Money's pointing out, the HBCUs vacuum is even different within their own level. Less much talking about getting to play D1. I got comments. I'm gonna let you talk, and I'm gonna try to get some of these comments that we got in the thing. Go ahead and start talking, and I'll
no doubt. You know, again, it's when I broke down the numbers between, again, and I'm a staunch SEC. SEC is the best. But if SEC is the best, then they want to continue to be the best. They will add in elements and they will recraft themselves as the best. So one of the things that, you had the big thing between ASU's president and Deion, who is SWAC, that kind of thing. My question is rhetorical. Who or what is SWAC in the context of what we're talking about? Because could the Southwestern Athletic Conference reframe themselves outside of even, and I know this is almost out of context, not necessarily just the football or the sports, but the merchandise, the brand, the culture. And could that be somewhere else on the 8 billion people on the planet? Because I tell you, one way to level up economically to cover that gap is to be able to sell that culture, just like we've sold hip hop, just like we've sold entertainment. The rest of the world craves us. I have friends in Japan, they love hip hop. Friends in Europe, they love hip hop.
Okay.
Africa, 54 countries in Africa, they love hip hop. East Asia. If SWAC is something, and we have said for years, again, I just said I'm a child of SWAC. Even though I didn't go to it as a university, it's still part of my culture. It was the first 18 years. That's something that is intellectually profitable. That is something that is copyright, trademark. Why are we not thinking about that? Exactly. Exactly. Why are we not thinking about it?
Because I didn't go to one. I'm in Atlanta and I love HBCU.
Exactly.
I do shows trying to figure out how to get them more money. So I'm fully loving what you're saying. Keep finishing up. I want to read one of your comments when you get a chance.
We saw everybody that had, like Joy said, everybody had a gold chain that was in the NFL to show the effect of one person. One person can change the game in an NFL, which again is white owned. They own it. What could a group of universities do for the entire world under the same premise? Because I will tell you, the U.S. has the best and strongest U.S. trademark laws. Again, IP, the ability to market, to trade, to sell your product, and to scale. There is nowhere better than here, regardless. And there's no culture, I would say, that is more attractive than what you see at HBCUs at a culturally conscious level. So that's when you start hitting it. I was like,
that's the bill. That's the bill. Let me read one of these comments real quick. And says one sister says, Michelle says, but Deion exploited that frame of thinking, what we talked about earlier. He said, I'm yours, and then dipped. She says, I am one of the people who say HBCU culture does need to be gatekept. That 4 years cannot be touched at a PWI. And so, Michelle, what I'll say to you and respectfully is I'm challenging the frame of thinking. The frame of thinking from this standpoint, I agree with you 100% that the 4 years cannot be touched. That's why when I did, for example, I had head coach at Howard University, Larry Scott, on the show, and that's what he sells because he actually turned down Nick Saban a couple years ago, right? We had him on the show when he made that decision and talked about why did he turn it down. It's for the very reasons that you're talking about, Michelle, in the sense that that experience can't be sold and we will take care of you or whatever. So you can do that and still, I challenge the frame of thinking that industry that's transactional, such as head football coaching, and you want to play in a way that's different than everyone else. And that's the limiting frame, it's a limiting mindset. It's a limiting mindset to think, well, we want our coaches, kind of like Joy alluded to, where you can never leave. Because if we're not this upset, to Joy Taylor's point, who goes into Jackson State? Who wants people like it's a good coach? Now you might not want to go now. To her point,
yeah.
So I'm trying to show how this limiting. So you're saying you exploited the frame of thinking, but why is that the frame of thinking? That frame of thinking is still not saying what is the best way to play today. What is the best way to elevate? The reality is even Oklahoma, with all its history, could not keep Lincoln Riley. Once you understand that at the highest level, that's how the game is played, you learn the game. You don't complain and fight the game, but you do take advantage of everywhere you can exploit it, and you play to win. Play to win is trying to get the next Deion, get the next athlete to come coach, even if only 4 years. So there's a second coach who goes from an HBCU to a Division I. I'm not trying to say listen to the one way of thinking. I brought on Coach Larry Scott to applaud the fact that he did not take that leap. But what I am challenging our community to get to is to realize both decisions are okay.
Yep.
That's the frame of thinking, because for everybody else, it is. That's the elevation. The elevation is play the game like everyone else. There should not be this cultural obligation that makes a Michael who who a couple years ago when I challenged you, go as high as you can go, and now you're circling back, helping these HBCUs increase their endowment.
But it's not. Look, it's not what it will help me as well. You know what I mean?
Of course, but it always should be. What happens is, here's what's always worked. You highlighted this the last time you were on the show. You're gonna remember this, and I'm gonna apply it to this conversation right here. You highlighted when we were doing the conversation about Kanye and Kyrie or whatever. You were on the show for me, right? And we talked about how people mistakenly think how the Jews elevated, and we do it from this perspective of that they just do it within themselves,
right,
whatever. And you highlighted that throughout the world, wherever they were at, they mastered a couple industries. Yep. And the reason I'm highlighting this because you said it helps you too that you're doing this with the HBCUs, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm highlighting that is because here's what's worked throughout human history: a value for value exchange always works.
Always.
And so the reason I'm highlighting that is when we limit our thinking and get upset because somebody left us, we're not allowing them to play in the market the way everybody else plays, because every other group does not insulate in this way that we think they do. They come to America and play in the entire market.
Right.
They literally do. And we have this limited thinking. And that's what I wanted to challenge when I say, when you realize Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier, right? Well, he's breaking the color barrier, and they smartly say, you know what? The best way to play this and make the most money is let everybody play.
Right.
And that becomes the highest game. So to separate from the highest game as if you could compete with that never works in no industry. Now, if you're separating because you're going after a niche for your own money, for your own family, again, love Ice Cube created the big three in a unique way for himself. I hope he wins, but he's not foolish enough to think he's going to compete with the NBA, right? And the reason I'm saying that it's foolish is because because of our particular experience when we were not allowed to be in markets and had to have our own based on the situation at the time, we literally think other cultures and races try to have their own market in itself. No, it's like Brother Pianki said on that show that he called into that the Asians come and took the market from the Jews when it came to the clothing market.
Right.
Whatever. But they didn't.
Yeah.
But again, that was to come compete in the biggest market where you get the most money. Exactly. They came to compete in the market as the game was played.
Oh, I got one for you. So
go ahead.
It's along the lines of you saying play like everybody else played. I would tweak that to say play like the game is supposed to be played.
I love that.
And the reason why I say that because it's not necessarily everybody. There are lots of groups that are getting left out, that are disenfranchised. But again, at the highest level, one thing I will say, America, we kind of get diluted in about whether race or whatever. America is a competitive landscape. You compete for the freedoms that we talk about. And the highest level of that freedom is expressed in competing in capitalistic markets, however you feel about capitalism. You know how I'm not I participate in capitalism. I do not like unfettered capitalism, but I know that to survive, to keep my progeny, keep my ideas, my children, and my culture, I have to learn the way the game is played. It is not predicated by, oh, this is the white man's game, or this is how this thing is played. There are palpable rules, not opinions. There are measured goals.
Learn the game
of how it plays.
Game. I got a comment I want to talk about that's fitting like what we're talking about. Brother James says, yes, we want to compete with our schools and institutions, not by exporting our best and brightest. The rest of the world can't love sending their best and brightest, whether it be to especially like tech and that kind of stuff. They love sending their best and brightest wherever the best is, whether that be certain schools based on your based on the actual subject matter. There's schools in in Europe, if you will, that have the best in this. There are certain schools in Asia that are the best in this. There are certain schools that are in Africa. I hate using it as a continent, but countries within Africa that are the best in this. Everybody loves to send their best and brightest to wherever human history. The best and brightest is in that industry. You almost, if you're very good, hate that you don't get to go to the best spot. So that's how everyone's competing, but we have this culture, rightfully so. Let me say that first and foremost, based on our Black American experience being forced to have our own, because it never should have been a time where we wasn't competing. This country was founded on some BS. We can all stand on that. However, we need HBCUs. Let me say that. We need them. There is a lane they have to fill. However, I am challenging to elevate that the only way you play in a global market is not to isolate. You have your own through your own ownership, but every culture will connect with anybody who brings value to value.
And that's the whole thing about inclusion. You just said you always send, no matter what your lane is, you always send your best and brightest to somebody else's best and brightest. That's how the ideation has come about. If you look about the creation of any country, any trade route, a lot of the, again, industrialization came about not because some European person came up with it, but because somebody met somebody else, or somebody went to some, like, say, why do you think they went to, the libraries of Timbuktu in antiquity?
Exactly.
You send your best.
Who had the most knowledge?
The places where the most knowledge is. Now, again, it gets into this whole thing about obligation, right? What is the mission of the best? In antiquity, if you go to other countries, under cultures, it is such as the best, get the knowledge, do it. They do send something back in terms of resources. Absolutely. I have friends that, again, in engineering stuff, Absolutely. They were all, as soon as they get that job, as soon as the doctor got the job, they're sending something back. Maybe we're not requiring that, and it's hard to on an individual level because we just got finished talking about these athletes having to carry the load. But there are mechanisms as which, if we do send our best, hopefully our best ideas go along with our best character, which also go with our best athletes. And in there, we can send something or create pathways to where we do get more benefit than what we're seeing now.
Well, I love that. And we'll kind of close it out. We're going to play this one more cut, and we'll get ready to close this thing out. But I love what you're saying right now, because, you and I have talked about that. It's basically, in a capitalistic society, the more conscious money that we have, you've talked about this, money without consciousness hurts people, right?
Hurts, yeah, because it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what happens is, absolutely, we, in a sense, should raise our children to be conscious of their community and of their culture, but not this unfair obligation of money going up.
Right.
But here's when we've arrived from a psychological standpoint, that to a degree, that obligation is not required often in other races and cultures. People individually decide whether they do or they don't. And at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't or is perceived not to, that's what really is what's happening. It's perceived not to be given back.
Right.
We feel like we have some obligation over that. You don't know an individual's requirements. You don't know who they are helping. But even if they're selfish, we don't think nothing of it when other cultures do that. And I'm saying our highest level of thinking is to be okay whether somebody does or does not. Because at the end of the day, if the things that often a lot of people are complaining about what somebody else is doing, if enough of us were doing it within our own family structures, we wouldn't even have this conversation.
Boom. Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that's the curation of the culture more so than like what she was talking about with gatekeepers. You don't need gatekeepers, you need curators. We need curators of the culture. And
that's what people that know my history, I'm dying curating.
Yeah,
I'm challenging the thought process to how our limited thinking makes us look at stuff to the point where we're emotional and knowing that we're teaching that to the next generation instead of the game itself. There's one other comment that James made that I want to add this clarity. I'm going to play this cut as well. He highlighted, for example, he says, Japan sent their best and they went back and built their own. Like we really are messed up by this construct of race that we think that that's an analogy. It's not an analogy when you understand race was made up the way that it was. When you're talking about an entire country sending their best, yes, and a country with that nationality sending their best to return to their homeland. To hey, what did you learn over there and do it here? To equate that to somehow that could be done within a country, because you wouldn't have that expectation if you're in a homogenous country, which most of the countries in the world are relatively homogenous. You know what I mean? The United States ain't the only one with a lot of diversity, but most are homogenous, and that's not the thinking. Bring it back to our race. No, you bring it back to the people that's like-minded, that's gonna help you build it. And hopefully, most of them do look like you. But you know, we highlighted Rashad on the last show with us. We want to be. He's able to help more of us because he knows how to strategically build teams. His team looks like him. But there's a big percentage of it doesn't, and that him making those strategic alliances is how he's elevated to be able to live anywhere around the world and give back to the Mental Dialogue Community Club. He does that as a member, knowing the work I'm doing at the ground level. Right. So his give back may not be seen. I mean, he has give backs that are seen, but I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
It may not be seen, but he's a big reason I'm still going. You're the same way. You're a big reason I'm still going. I encourage you to go as far as you can go. But you've always readily said, I support this because we can't do the same thing. I can't trade foreign markets. You know what I'm saying? You can pop into the barbershop a couple times a year. I'm there every month. We got our lane. I respect your lane, and I know you conscious money. You're conscious,
and both are needed, right?
Exactly. Both and we don't make room for that when we put things in the dichotomy that the world puts us in. Let me play this cut from William Agnew, which another platinum level member.
Stretch my mind. That brother always stretch my mind.
We're gonna close it out with this cut right here. We'll get a response to it, and then we're out of here. Because I don't want to take too much of your time as well. Again, I'm just challenging. Now, people don't have to agree. Y'all actually would make it comments. Y'all could have jumped on the show. I forgot to tell y'all that. I do these pop-up shows, so I forget to tell people they can hit the link and come on the show with us. Just because I don't do them on a regular basis no more. All right, let me share the screen one more time.
Bro, why is everything race with you? Why is it the race card with you? Everything's the race card with you, right? What's going like? And you hear this all the time. But here's the deal: no matter what the issue is, right? 60 to 70% of the time, what are we going to fall back on? Race.
The construct.
The construct.
And let me say this, and I'm going to end this thing. I'm going to say this.
Okay.
Here's the flip side of what you're talking about. Is when a Magic Johnson or somebody goes up, expires into business, starts making key relationships. We know Magic Johnson is very committed to our community. But I tell you, in Lansing, Michigan, I know from a friend, they don't necessarily feel that way in Lansing, Michigan.
Right.
Because of the viewpoint that you and I are talking about now. And so what happens is all other groups have the freedom to expand and diversify as necessary to get their hands on as much resources as possible. We have because we see it through this lens, have a certain way that it's supposed to happen. And if it don't, we'll throw somebody who's actually committed to us in the best way that they can. We'll start throwing them under the bus because of this lens.
We throw them away.
That's a made-up construct from the very beginning.
100%.
We're holding accountability, and what most people learn is, fuck that accountability. Let me secure my resources. Some people decide, I'm just going to only do this for my family. And we don't realize we drove them to that because we're buying into this construct.
Right.
I think you're getting what I'm saying, but I wanted to bring that challenge today. So I'll give you one last thought, and I'm going to read this piece. Go ahead.
Okay. You bringing it home, because at bringing it home, full circle. Everything we just talked about, the full circle is the impact of that. So the impact of all of that is that you don't practice, you don't sharpen your sword, you don't sharpen your skills. Your skills stay dull because everything that you argue is under race. So what you don't is you don't have expansive thinking, right? When there's an issue, You're solving every problem. What happens if we solve every problem with the same solution? There's no expansion. We don't grow. We don't become smarter. We don't become intelligent. We don't dive into those things. We don't listen to those things. Like you said, we throw those people away when they come with a different idea about what the solution is. And if we don't go, oh, it ain't race for you, what do? Like you said, we throw them under the bus because we think everybody has the solution or the answer or the problem is all about race. And that is the mind fuck is so fucking sweet, bro, because
hey, I think it's a great summary. We on that broadcast, we predicted what happened with Deion.
Yeah.
You feel me?
Mm-hmm.
Because, to give even more context to the Magic Johnson thing, just for those who may not know, he's from Lansing, Michigan. So I know a friend from Lansing, Michigan, that they're not a fan of Magic Johnson. Outside looking in is relative for us. So we love what we see Magic running around doing out here as a mogul and killing the game or whatever. But in Lansing, he ain't done enough for Lansing. Like that limiting mindset, that obligation, that if Magic was worried about it, maybe he don't go as far and as help as many people as he does, because he would have to make sure he gives back to
the land.
Again,
Yeah.
What I'm saying here is not that I'm saying don't give back to Lansing, but it's just the way the world works is nobody has that limitation. It's go as far as you can, pull up as many as your own as you can, but to understand that to compete in the world, strategic alliance with others matters. That ain't about being accepted. It's value for value. I don't care.
Ooh, big one.
Accept me. You have to respect my value. That's what we don't understand. That's what happened with Deion. Deion, on his personal quest, wanted to be a head coach. At one time, he was mentioned in the NFL very early in his career, again, as a big-time follower of him. He eventually said, I can't deal with these pro athletes. And he always wanted to be straight to head coaching. He did not want to waste no time. So right now he's on a path to fulfill his personal goal, whether you agree or disagree with it. I'm just highlighting you have to make room for a coach Larry Scott who turns down a Nick Saban, and for Deion who aspirationally wants to take a program and see if he can coach against the best.
We need both.
I love both of them. We need both.
We need both.
Not arguing and fighting and even having to do dialogues like this. That speaks to the cultural hurt. That's all I got, King. If you want to make one last comment, I'm out of here.
No, my only one comment is, like, for everybody that's in love with HBCUs, please learn what the endowment is for your HBCU. Please learn how it functions. You can talk to me, talk to anybody, but if we want to have where we can scale and grow and get our own and be inclusive, it starts there. And it's not just HBCUs, but this is a 20th century construct that we should be really more comfortable about than we are in the 21st century. So that's it. I had to put that plug in there. So
I love it. Great plug. Matter of fact, it reminds me, I got a couple plugs I'm going to play right now. We got this thing. We got the art dialogue and dinner on Sunday, December the 11th.
6 months by.
I know, right? And then December the 16th, we got the Mental Dialogue Live Experience. We're doing mental health dialogues. I got 3 dope therapists coming on to do soapboxes. So I'm going to play a couple little quick cuts with that. And we out this piece, man. Thank you for your time, King.
I love it. Love to be here, man.
Absolutely. We just give y'all go to mentaldialogue.com to find out about both of these. So this is on Sunday, art, dinner, and dialogue.
So give me a run for my money. Sipping bubbly, feeling lovely. Living lovely. Just lovely. I wanna be with you. I wanna be with you. I wanna be with you.